Okay. Well, good evening, dear colleagues. And, well, happy to not really see, but hopefully interact with you today. And today I'm going to talk about translanguaging, some ways to use it, etc. Well, before we actually delve into the topic itself, I do hope that you can hear me. So if you can you just put a plus into the chat box, which would be great, just for me to know that you can hear me, that everything is okay with our connection and that everything is functioning. Okay, right, good. So before we delve into the topic, let me just briefly introduce myself. Well, I'm an English teacher and a teacher of a variety of language and translation related disciplines. I work at Kharkiv National University, but I'm also like a tutor, a consultant, this kind of stuff. So everything related to language, translation, well, business language as well, business English mostly. Well, and as usual, many thanks to Na Urok for the opportunity to be here, to share ideas, to hopefully ask some of yours, and to raise the questions that we are actually facing now. And there was quite a few, I'd say, because really there is a lot of change currently in education and in language learning as well. So just before we start, I'd like to know, well, do you use L1 in your classes? And do you use it a lot? Because this is something that my presentation today is mostly focused on. So I'd like to just know your opinion. Do you use it? And again, do you do that a lot? Do you do that in limited amounts or anything, any of your ideas? Because, well, today we are going to speak about some of its benefits, some of the challenges, etc. And while you're doing that, I'm really looking forward to your questions, comments in the chat box. I will surely answer all of them at the end of the talk, and I do hope that our facilitators today won't let me miss any. Okay, and so well, we have some answers as for language use, right? So yes, most people do somehow. Yeah, so well, it's sometimes, yeah, yes, or sometimes, okay, and a lot, okay, a lot with young learners, great, yeah. Which, well, basically young learners probably, they consider it quite a challenging group as well. Yes, beginners and young learners specifically as well. Yeah, so there it's kind of difficult to go by L2 only. Right, so sometimes, mostly sometimes, right. As for the concept of translanguaging, this will be our first point for discussion. So first, I'll just say a couple of words on what translanguaging is, which I'm sure you know already. Then I'll switch to the benefits of translanguaging, how we can use this technique for the benefit of our students mostly. And then I'll also speak about some caveats, yeah, some limitations, some warnings, because essentially this topic and this approach, well, not really approach, but this technique is quite controversial. Now, it has been quite controversial for a long time, and it remains that way, basically. So, as for translanguaging and its definition, it's kind of a very general definition, which says that translanguaging is the use of L1 or any other languages that the learners know. Maybe they are native languages, maybe not. Well, I put it as EFL teaching, but basically teaching any language for that matter. On the screen, you can also see a couple of books that I've used while preparing this talk, but there is quite a lot of research now, and it's mostly being done, well, go back to the question why, it's mostly being done in non-native environments, not only, because, well, as you can see, even the authors of these books, they work like in the US, in the UK, but many of the research is being done in the countries where English is not the first language, is not one. And this is like very, very general definition, which is kind of tricky and which remains quite like an object for discussion. Why? Well, primarily, probably when anyone hears about using L1 when learning and teaching English or any other foreign language, traditionally we associate it with more or less with the grammar translation method. Yeah. We all know quite well that this method actually refers to some lessons where students learn grammar patterns, where they practice them through translation and generally learn a language through a lot of translation, which doesn't contribute to communication that much. And of course, it's been criticized quite severely for a lot of time, and probably rightly so. Yeah, so it's kind of not the most communicative approach and technique. But the point is that translanguaging does not equal grammar and translation method. It's not the same. And translanguaging now is more and more referred to as the use of L1 in English learning and teaching environments, but like it's strategic use. It's use when we understand why we're doing that, actually. What's the purpose? Either we cannot do it otherwise, or we need to reduce the cognitive load of the student, well, depending. Yeah. And basically, the widespread use of the grammar translation method, which used to be very popular and was probably it was associated with the way cultures started to interact with each other like centuries ago, and it was mostly through translation. So it's quite logical that many of the practitioners and many of the people who developed theories of language learning, they use this method. But its use and its inefficacy in many ways led to another extreme, I'd say, which actually requires that L1 is completely banned from the English language classrooms. We have this in the communicative approach, in basically anything like project-based learning, task-based learning, anything. So this is like a general principle that derives from the ideology of native speakerism. And here you can see, like, again, a very basic definition of that, which actually means that native speakers are the best models for imitating, for learning. So it's the best way to learn a language. It's to pick it up from native speakers in terms of the language itself, the pronunciation, and also culture. That's a culture really used to be a very important element in learning language. And it still is to some extent, but relatively recently, let's say, things started to change. First of all, the way that we use the English language has shifted quite significantly, and it turned into lingua franca. Yeah, a language that is used for international communication for a variety of purposes. And very frequently today, we use this language to talk not to native speakers, native speaker. Of learning a language as learning it to perfection, basically. Then now we understand that many of our learners, well, unless they are going to be, I don't know, like philologists, translators, whatever, they won't need that much, like that kind of a level. What they need is to be able to communicate and to be intelligible, essentially. To be able to function in intercultural environments. And that is why this kind of perception of language as like art that needs to be mastered like, in all possible ways, it's no longer relevant for many people, at least for many of the learners. Another thing, which is also related to English being a lingua franca, is related to culture. And again, if native speakers were supposed to get the learners involved in their culture, in the Western culture, whatever you may call it, now, as people are more and more interacting with non-native speakers, again, the relevance of one particular culture and being able to adapt to one specific culture, maybe not the culture of one country, yeah, but of a group of countries, but still, this Western culture is, again, no longer a must. Rather, what we need is to prepare our learners to work in environments with very, very different people, with very, very different native languages. Some of them might be native speakers, some may not. That depends. And that probably, well, these are just some of the factors, but still, that has led to this shift in the perception of L1 in the classroom. Again, that doesn't mean that we need to like speak L1 all the time. It doesn't mean that we need to make our students translate all the time. Definitely not. Again, translation methods and translanguaging, they're very different. But more and more people and more researchers are looking into this issue and realize that both teachers and learners can see the benefits of translanguaging when it is applied correctly, let's say. First of all, again, one of the concepts related to native speakers was a monolingual classroom. Yes, L1 could not be used because if it is assumed that if we translate, we'll never learn to think in, well, English, L2, whatever it is. But there is one problem. And there is no specific research, not at all, that would show that actually we process different languages by different parts of the brain. And that's kind of crazy. Yeah, there are some areas in the brain, there are some regions that are responsible for processing language as a concept, producing language, interpreting a language, I don't know, discriminating between sounds, whatever that might be. But these are the areas that are responsible for language. And that means that all the languages will function more or less like in between, if I may say that, those areas. And they're all stored in the same areas of the brain. So to say that, for example, now we're working with English, so we think only by this part of the brain, and now we're speaking, Chinese, and now we use this part of the brain. That's impossible. Just our brain doesn't work like that. Which is one of the arguments that is put forward by the researchers who are looking into the concept of translanguaging. And basically the main point of translingual classrooms deals with the fact that languages will also, like, always influence each other. I don't mean that they will necessarily intervene with each other, though that happens too, obviously. But they will always influence each other. And there are some benefits to it that we can potentially exploit with our students in our classrooms. Talking about that, one of the primary questions in learning, in the science of learning anything, not only language, is the issue of memory. And memory, well, here it's not a very recent definition, but still, when we memorize something, we draw on our past experiences to use this information in the present. When we learn a language, especially when we start learning a language, though not only, we do not have any background knowledge. We cannot proceed from any past experiences to learn this language, to master the new concept, the new vocabulary, grammar, etc. We don't know anything about it. And that's why learning a language is very difficult at the beginning. So probably you've also remarked that some of your students really struggle at the beginning, like A1, A2 level, kind of this. But then this process actually speeds up. So they can learn quicker. They can go through B1 class level, B2 level much quicker than they mastered A1 and A2. Why? Because they have more background knowledge. And if they have more background knowledge, that means that they have more, let's say, concepts, associations, etc., to attach the new knowledge to, which is important. So when we say that students start learning a language, and yes, they don't know anything about this language, but they do have the knowledge of their own language. And I'm not talking only about grammar, vocabulary, sentence structure. It's just the way the language functions. And this is something that can be exploited by us as language teachers. We always say to our students that they need to reach a level where they don't need to translate in their heads, which is a great thing. And yes, this is what is expected, because if we translate in our heads, even I'm not talking about translating word by word, but if we try to translate phrases, we'll never speak very naturally. Yeah, we'll speak very slowly and well, whatever. This is a great piece of advice. But when we talk about low levels, about people who are starting to learn a language, for them, essentially translating is, well, if I may say that, the only way to start speaking in, like, somehow, just to start speaking. Definitely at low levels, we have a lot of drilling. Yeah, we drill phrases, we drill vocabulary, whatever, like grammar structures, etc. But the problem with drilling is that though it works, and again, it is one of the tools for sure, but drilling sometimes means that a student has to remember a phrase which they cannot understand. Like, they cannot understand how it's constructed. And that means that they won't remember it, at least not for long. And the only language that they will remember and they will be able to use in the future, it's their language, the language that they produce. Correctly, incorrectly, naturally, unnaturally, that's another story, but it is them who produce this language. And the only way to do that at low levels is to translate. And of course, there is a lot of talk around, I don't know, false friends, about warning about sounding unnatural sounding, well, just, well, non-native again. For beginners, it's kind of, well, it doesn't matter much, let's say. For them, it's important just to start building their own phrases, like somehow. And then with, like, over time, they will correct these sentences, they will make them more diverse, whatever, more natural. And that is why, of course, the benefits of translanguaging, they mostly fall onto beginners who do that anyway. So the first point, as well, you can see on the slide, is to understand that students do it anyway. They do translate in their heads, or they use dictionaries, I mean bilingual dictionaries, not those that provide definitions. So they do it anyway. And so we can teach them to do that so that these techniques didn't harm them, so that they could draw some benefits from it, but also not to overuse this method as well. Of course, yeah, beginners are those who can benefit from this most. Starting from just A0 level students who are just introduced into the language. And again, according to the classical, very classical communicative approach, teachers need to use, I don't know, gestures, well, visuals, whatever, but not to use their L1 in any case. That's great, okay. But the point is that with A0 students, it's kind of impossible. Well, meaning it is possible, but that limits communication with the students very much. So of course, yeah, you can pre-teach some things, like some very common exercises, I don't know, read and answer, match the words and definitions, whatever that might be. And this is a great thing because this is something that they will see a lot. It will be repeated for sure. But otherwise, your communication with the students is very, very limited, because whatever you can say beyond those few phrases, those few words that they can understand, they just won't get you. That's why sometimes translanguaging can be used as, well, as a CCQ, if you wish, yeah. So you can check understanding of the student through translanguaging, through basically saying something, yeah, given the instruction in the English language, and then repeating it in their L1. Sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you might need to just sandwich the phrase. So for example, you understand that generally the phrase is familiar to the student, but there is one word, for instance, that might be not familiar. And then you sandwich, yeah, so you say everything in English, but then only this word, you can say it in L1, like in English and then in L1. And that enriches communication with the students. The same goes for explaining, not always explaining, but grammar rules and vocabulary. Again, ideally, we need to teach grammar and vocabulary and, well, functional language, whatnot. We need to teach it through inductive methods, through guided discovery, etc. Yeah, so where we do not really teach, we do not lecture the student, yeah, but we need just to ask some questions, give some examples, maybe visuals, etc., for the student to get this knowledge, to reach some conclusions, and to understand it by themselves. The point is, again, at low levels, it's very frequently impossible. And sometimes you will need to maybe not speak L1, but draw parallels with L1 for them to understand. If, for example, you are teaching, present perfect for the very first time, a tense which has no, even approximate equivalence, actually, in Ukrainian, again, maybe you would need to use some direct instruction with elements of translanguaging in order to explain that. Because otherwise, again, if you use only like CCQs available with language available to the student, yes, they will get something, but it will be very limited, and you will not be like really sure that actually the student got what you told them. Apart from that, the students themselves, they use it naturally. They check their own understanding with you, if you wish, through L1, low-level students meaning. When they have an instruction they're not sure about, or when they have a sentence, a word they're not sure about, they will kind of, almost subconsciously translate it to check their own understanding, even if they understand it correctly. And it's kind of okay to confirm that for them. Without maybe even switching to their L1 yourself, basically. It may be unnecessary. Then there is a problem of vocabulary, teaching vocabulary. Normally, again, classically, when we teach vocabulary, when we teach some specific vocabulary, it's our target language for the lesson, it's one thing. But when there is some language that just emerges during the lesson, because when you, at your target language, you prepare some, again, visuals, gestures, contexts, whatever, that can illustrate this vocabulary quite well. But there is also emergent vocabulary, the vocabulary that they might want to use in their speaking, in the production phase, for example. There is some vocabulary that they hear in the recordings or that they read in a text, and they need to know what that is. And classically, you should do what? You should explain. You should explain that word to the student. Of course, sometimes you can just say that if it's not that relevant, you can say just like skip it or try to get it from the context, for instance, which is not always possible. And if not, you're supposed to explain that in their L2. So in English, for instance. At low levels, it's kind of impossible, again, because they won't understand the explanation. And sometimes even at, like pre-intermediate levels or something, it might be tricky because you understand that to explain this word or this phrase, you need to involve some even more complicated language potentially. So again, it might be tricky. And there is nothing wrong with actually translating that. If it is, again, if you don't see any other option, the point is not to make it your first option and start speaking like just in L1 all the time, not that. But if there is no other option, if you understand that just translating it will be beneficial to the student from the point of view of the cognitive load, that it will be just easier for them to understand and we will not like overload them, then maybe it's kind of worth a shot. If we talk about, again, the functioning of our brain, sometimes it happens, I'd say that to students of all levels, but to beginners specifically, when they have a word or a phrase or something, and they just tell us that we kind of understand what that means, but could you still translate it for us? Because essentially they understand it from the context. For example, they've listened to a recording or they read something or they watched a video, whatever, like they understand it from the context. But in order to be able to really use this word or this phrase or whatever, they need some kind of an anchor. They need to differentiate it from other words, other phrases, other concepts. And sometimes they can only do it through their L1. It's quite frequent with abstract concepts where they kind of understand, but they can potentially attach these words to quite different words in L1. And they're not sure which would be like more precise, maybe. Maybe they just like there is no such concept in their L1, and then it's even more difficult. So again, translating or like again sandwiching, that might be good. So for them, like for them to understand it better, for them to understand it more precisely, to understand what that is about. Of course, if we talk about school contexts, L1 can be used for like classroom management, etc. Well, of course you can do that too, because well, if you really need to make sure that your students understand, to do that in L1, like some just spontaneous things that emerge during the class and they're related to classroom management, you could use again L1, like not pure. Normally we do not use like L1 purely, so it will be some kind of sandwiching, but still, so you can, and sometimes you just don't have another choice but to use L1 somehow. Of course, you need to minimize it for sure, but still. Another thing about beginners, and it's also related now not only to beginners, but to some specific stages in language learning. And first, of course, we start with beginners, but then we can also talk about something like B1 plus students, B2 students, which encounter, they encounter the so-called plateau. And translanguaging can help them to kind of get unstuck. What I wanted to say by this, first of all, beginner students, for sure they do lack confidence, and it is kind of scary for them to try and start speaking. They understand that, in their own language, they can express any idea, they can do that beautifully, stylistically appropriately, etc. But they cannot do the same in their L2, and this is normal. At their level, at like A1, A2 level, it's okay that they cannot do this. However, this idea is pretty uncomfortable for them, which is again logical. And for that purpose, you can actually help maybe them to build their confidence through translanguaging and a little bit of translation even. For instance, very frequently they just go in, if we talk about beginner students, not like B1 plus for now, they just get into the mode, I don't know how to say that, I cannot do that yet, etc. And the point is that sometimes they can't, but sometimes they can do that. And in that case, for example, you could ask your students, again, in English, like, what do you want to say? When they answer in their L1, you can simplify their idea to the point where they can express it. Maybe they won't be able to say all of that, or maybe they won't be able to say it very, again, beautifully, quote unquote. But you understand that they can, actually. And you can return this sentence, this phrase, this idea to them in their L1 and to make them translate. And in that way, it builds their confidence. They realize, first of all, that they can actually say that. Again, maybe not entirely, maybe not very correctly, but they can. And that gets them into the habit of, speaking, let's say. And it also shows them that they need to simplify things. Because if you just suggest doing that, like as a strategy or something, they just, in most cases, they will answer that they can't. They cannot put it in simple words, but in fact they can. And that gets them into the habit of using the resources, the linguistic resources available to them to express their idea, somehow, for now. For that moment, express it somehow. which is already great and which builds confidence among the students for sure. Especially, well, again, at those levels where they're not like able to speak. I mean, that they cannot express everything they want. But here there is also denture, because when at low levels, they try to simplify their language. They try to simplify it, well, again, just to express their idea at least somehow. That becomes a habit which, which can be pretty risky when they go to higher levels. Because, essentially, when that has become their habit, they will do it even when they don't need to. Even when they already have enough of linguistic resources to say or to write whatever, something more complicated. They will still oversimplify their language. And sometimes that really happens. And it's one of the reasons, one of the factors that determine that kind of linguistic plateau, if we can call it that way. Yeah, when students at levels of B1+, B2, etc., they, on the one hand, they understand that they can express a lot, if not everything they want. Again, whether it will be always correct or not, that's another story. But they can communicate pretty efficiently already. And on the other hand, they cannot see that much of progress. Well, not that much of progress. They do not see a quick progress anymore. Yeah, the kind of progress that they could witness at low levels. Now they do not see that, which is, again, logical, because they need to put more effort into it, and it requires maybe more time as well. And considering that they have this habit of oversimplifying their language when they speak, and they can express their ideas like that. Yeah, so that works for them. What probably could be done in order to get them, again, give them a new habit, which is relevant for them at that moment, is to do kind of the same, but when you hear their idea in English, you could, again, bounce it back at them in their L1, but in a more complicated way. So ask them to say the same, but in more complicated words. By modeling, not just saying, make it more complicated, yeah, or introduce this and these words. No, you can just actually model these possible things, possible solutions that they could exploit if they want to make their language, C1 level, C2 level. Again, by modeling this, by doing this over time, they will be probably more aware of what they could say or what they should control, actually, and how they should control their language in order to achieve a higher level. Of course, yeah, if we talk about adult learners, but business people, sometimes they just reach a level where they don't need more. Yeah, they can already communicate, it's enough for them. But if we're talking about schools, if we're talking about universities, yeah, so the students, they continue learning. And frequently they learn for some kind of exams. And this, feeling of plateau is pretty uncomfortable. And they don't quite know how to, what they should do to see more progress in themselves. Because on the one hand, they already have a pretty good base. On the other, they understand a lot usually. Yeah, so they have a pretty good, maybe even C1, C2 vocabulary and grammar and everything, but in passive. Yeah, so it's a passive condition of that language. They can understand it when hearing, when reading, but they do not produce it in their own language. And well, translanguaging in this way can also help them overcome that kind of a plateau, which is, well, a good thing too. Sometimes even, even translation, like as part of a home task from time to time, some really, really complicated sentences, well, not sentences, texts, even translating those can be quite good, in order, again, to encourage them and to show them how they can, well, how they can switch to a higher, also register, not only a language level, but also register. Because in the L1 situations, they do it naturally. Yeah, they switch to the necessary degree of formality. Well, so they adjust the style the way they need. And they do it unconsciously. But in L2, probably they sometimes need something more specific and something more explicit. And you can also, of course, you can explicitate that with writing tasks for sure. But some kind of, again, translanguaging, sandwiching can be quite good as well for that purpose. Without overdoing it, of course. And so, of course, it shouldn't be like, I don't know, 30% of your lesson. Of course not. But when you see that you can really improve, obviously improve the, well, not you, but the student can improve what they said. Yeah, and you can really model it for them in L1. Like, why not? Probably the third point, which is also very important, and it's not that relevant for schools, though it is. Well, now it's becoming more and more relevant because, well, many of the schools and classrooms, they adopt CLIL methodologies. And in CLIL, well, CLIL basically refers to teaching subjects in the English language, well, in the English language, again, in L2, whatever that is. Well, mostly now we're talking about English, and there they might encounter some pretty complicated concepts. Complicated concepts, texts, well, materials, just whatever they are. And sometimes, again, they need some kind of, just translanguaging in order to understand the concept better. Like maybe translation of this concept, or maybe like a brief explanation in their L1, just to understand it. Where it's not a question of language itself, but it's rather about mediating concepts. It's not about linguistic competence proper, but even at the level of, I don't know, discussing texts, discussing, again, well, text, videos, audios, whatever they are, discussing that with elements of L1, depending on the level. And the same actually happens with some intercultural differences. Sometimes at the cultural level, we encounter some concepts, some ideas, some phenomena that are very different and that you cannot find in your, in your reality, actually, in your culture. There is no equivalent, not only in the language, which is, obviously there is no equivalent, but there is no equivalent even in the culture. And then you could exploit your language because, it becomes the only resource, the only, again, background knowledge that they can use in order, that they could use only to interpret it somehow, to understand it somehow. And that could be good as well. And as for intercultural competencies, actually translanguaging can be pretty useful. Maybe not when we are talking about classrooms with people with the same L1, though that too, kind of. But especially with classrooms where people do not, all of the people or some of the people do not have a shared L1. And there, on the one hand, essentially English becomes for them the only shared language. On the other, they can help each other understand different things, different cultural concepts through the lens of their L1. And this can be very helpful because they can use their background knowledge from their L1 in order to understand the new concept better themselves, but also to help maybe other students to understand it better. There is also, well, maybe counterintuitive situation. And, well, I'm not sure that I can call it a skill to develop because, well, it would be strange. But now in lingua franca, English as lingua franca environments, when mostly non-native speakers interact with each other, essentially, sometimes you need to be able to communicate at a very high level. And this is what we kind of wish for all of our students, for sure. And this is what will help them to function in any setting. But sometimes they will interact with people of a lower level. And they will need to adapt their language, which is not native to them, but they will have to adapt it even to even a lower level. Again, whether it's a question of developing a skill, I don't know. But again, our students need to be ready for that. They need to be ready for that. They need to understand that they will have to play essentially with language in all of the ways. Sometimes they need to show all of their competence, but sometimes they just need to be understood. And if they have another, again, let's say shared language with the person who they're talking to, sometimes maybe they will have to involve even that for this person to understand. If the person is, again, of a lower level. Or if, for example, if students are working, for English language learners, let's say, who are also working in some kind of an IT sphere, for example, or in another sphere which is pretty much saturated with internationalized words, yeah, they might need to be aware that they can use that and exploit those words in order to, again, other people, also for other people to understand them, in order to be understood partially. And in fact, translanguaging now, it's something that is happening pervasively. Like in business and industries, whatever can help to communicate, to work through a problem, whatever helps to do it fast, to make it more efficient, then it should work. And it should be used anyway. Because actually this is the culture of English as lingua franca, and business English as lingua franca including. And again, whether we can call this thing skills for us to develop in our students, well, I don't know. But at least we should make them aware of these tendencies and help them realize that banning L1 completely, it's not a solution, and sometimes it can be pretty harmful for communication, though it might seem quite a paradox. So translanguaging has a lot of benefits. And it is quite popular now, not only in learning a language, but just in functioning in this language. And for sure, it remains controversial. Its use remains controversial, and I'd say that really it requires much more research into what works, what doesn't work, what actually has maybe kind of an opposite effect. And only like looking at our classroom, looking at our students, we can understand what is the optimal, let's say, proportion of L1 use. Of course, ideally, the higher the level of our students is, the less translanguaging they will require. And actually, as some research has shown, students, they're pretty much aware of that. Yeah, they are aware that they need to use their L1 as little as possible. But completely banning it, especially at low levels, but not only, well, it's probably not an answer. And it's not like what their brain does just naturally. So these are probably the most important caveats concerning translanguaging, yeah, that we should not overdo it. We should not, let's say, go back to this kind of translation methods, which are not effective. So because we aim at creating people who are communicating efficiently, yeah, who are communicating freely. But still, we need to make them able to use any resources at hand. And if translanguaging can, I don't know, reduce their cognitive load, yeah, if it can understand a certain grammar structure or a word or phrase more effectively, more like, well, just easier, basically, and really like to make it more precise, to give them a more precise image in their mind, then why not? If they can use their language, well, their L1, if they have a shared L1, then if they use it while working in groups or pairs in order to help each other, then why not? If when they are starting, starting to speak, and they sandwich phrases, oh, they start speaking English, then they switch to L1, then back, and well, again, why not if it helps them to build their confidence? Because those sandwich words and phrases, they will disappear at a certain point in time. But the general logics of constructing phrases, constructing sentences, it will remain. And it will work for their benefit and their interests. So the idea of translanguaging actually, and our use of it, and our, let's say, presentation of it as a learning strategy should basically rely on balance. But if it allows us not to frustrate our students like too much, yeah, not to overload them. If we understand that it is very, like, either it is, well, it's impossible to do something in any other way, yeah, like to give an instruction or something, we understand that just, well, it's impossible. Then maybe translanguaging is an answer. If we can, again, use it for our students to get better results, then maybe translanguaging is an answer. But again, we do need more research, more practice, and more actually practical ideas as for how to use it. Yeah, how to use it, what works, and what could actually harm our students and well, lock them back into their L1. So probably these are just some prospects for future, well, research for us as practitioners, etc. And well, I thank you very much for being here today with us. And if you have any questions, any comments, you're welcome to put them in the chat. I hope maybe I'll see if the facilitators have already put something in the chat box. Well, we have a question. Does it happen that you can't recollect a word when people ask you? What should we do in such situation? Well, I'd say that, well, that might happen, of course, why not? But I'd say in most cases, either you will be able to paraphrase the sentence and help for them. Or if it is really like some specific word, if it's a term, for instance, you just say that, well, I don't know, and let us check it together. Why not? Yeah, because there are some things really, and that happened to me too, when these are like some terms, legal terms, engineering terms, and well, really, I don't know how that is called. I'm not even sure that I know what that means, like in Ukrainian, for that matter. So you just say that, and well, that's it. But as for the rest, normally you'll be able to paraphrase it. And, you know, for me, it's always like that. Even if you don't remember the exact word, it still can help the student to express this idea. So I don't think that, well, but then again, it depends. All right, do we have, okay, we have a comment also from Maria. It can take much more time than you have. I don't really get what can take more time. You mean translanguaging or the opposite, using only L2? Because, well, if we talk about L1 use, well, translanguaging, then it actually saves time in many ways. But that's also kind of a trap, because we need to understand that when we use translanguaging, we use it for the benefit of our students, not to save our time, not to make it easier for us, but for the student. And then again, that depends on the situation. And if we say that, well, and as for you using translanguaging, of course, it's always quicker. Again, and whether it's better, that's another question, and that depends on probably us as specialists in language. Okay, well, do we have any other questions? Maybe our moderators can help me. Do we have anything else? As for the questions, maybe I've missed something in the process. Okay, well, if not, then, well, I thank you very much. And again, thank you for being with us. Hopefully the information was a little bit useful. Again, these are just some of my ideas. And if you have any of yours, then probably it's something to be discussed and maybe even experimented on as part of some future research. Thank you very much, and well, have a nice evening.